Welcome to The Writer's Dream. This is a show where writers can talk about how they write their books, how they publish them, and how they market them. I'm Linda Maria Frank, and I am the author of Any Tillery Mysteries. You can find us on YouTube. Just search my name, Linda Maria Frank, and about 150 different interviews will come up if you're interested in finding some good books, hearing from local writers, and if you're also an aspiring writer or a writer in progress, you get some pretty good advice from these YouTube videos. We are also on Facebook. We have a page called The Writer's Dream. If you want to be on the show or if you have a question for me, message me through that Facebook page and I'll get back to you. So today's guest is Michael O'Keefe, and Michael O'Keefe has written Shot to Pieces. So, Michael, welcome.
Very happy to be here.
Good. And so tell us about your book.
Shot to Pieces. Shot to Pieces, imagine the book that I had intended to write pretty much since I became a cop, way back in the dark ages in 1986. But I didn't get much of an opportunity to write with the exception of maybe investigative reports for my homicide investigations.
Yeah.
Which I used to get in trouble for because I would write them in narrative form as opposed to the clipped police English. Supervisors would get a little annoyed because I had to go to a thesaurus to figure out some of the words. But the novel, and the reason I made it a novel, while much of it is based upon my career and my experiences, I wanted to write a larger story. Policing is difficult in a big city like New York, particularly with all the political
you can use that word.
In your way. Political? Yeah.
No, the other word.
Oh, the F-bomb. Yeah, we'll get to that.
No, not that word.
Not that one.
I just thought political.
Garbage,
stuff.
Yeah. There are a lot of euphemisms for garbage, I suppose. I wanted to tell a larger story because the fact of the matter is police work is usually a very traumatic event, particularly when the shit hits the fan and everything goes wrong, which if you're doing hard police work, that happens. Mm-hmm. Most people don't realize the price psychologically and emotionally that cops and their families have to pay, specifically when they're forced to use deadly physical force and someone dies. Sometimes there are cops who have survived shooting incidents like that, and there are times they'll tell you they wish they hadn't, because the psychological effect, the punishment that your mind exacts on you for the unnatural act of killing someone within your own species. People don't realize that, and with the anti-police hysteria that's out there now, they just don't ever take that into account. The idea that police are looking to gun people down for any reason is absurd. Anyone who's been in that position knows how absurd that is. The story of Patty Durr in Shot to Pieces explores this in depth, and you can see how he suffers and how his family has to suffer because of it. And that was the higher reason that I wanted to tell this story. Mm-hmm. And then the other reason is I think it's a pretty interesting story.
Okay, so tell us about the case itself, and then we'll go into the psychology of the character.
Okay, the novel begins with a homicide that actually was one of my murder cases from 2003 in Bushwick, in Brooklyn. And I use it as a springboard to tell the story of Patty Durr, my detective. He's on a ragged edge emotionally. His marriage is falling apart. And in telling the story of the murder investigation and his crumbling personal life, we go back over his 30-year police career and also his childhood, which was abusive in nature. And we see these things, these stresses that seem to make him almost self-destructive. And hopefully, if I did this well enough, we resolve all of those issues, the homicide, his personal life, and his background, and how he can possibly put it behind him finally.
Now, on the police force, when you apply for the police force, is there a psychological examination?
Oh yeah, very. It's an in-depth psychological.
imagine,
Actually,
yeah.
There's a. I think it's 1,000-word. When I took it anyway, well, I believe it was a 1,000-word questionnaire. A lot of repeat questions, different words. Basically, they're looking for deception.
And then also
There's an oral. A psychologist will go over your written, and they'll look at things, and they'll ask you specific questions that may concern them based upon your previous answers. So, I mean, it's not fail-safe. I imagine
course
people
not.
slip through the cracks, but it is very thorough.
well, you know, I shouldn't put it this way, but I am. Just because you're crazy doesn't mean you're stupid,
This is true.
right?
But, yeah, well, those are two separate tests.
Yeah, you will consider serial killers.
Unfortunately, they seem to be diabolically brilliant at times.
Some of them, according to the movies, anyway. Right?
Yeah, well, they're operating on a different impetus than your average street killer.
Yeah. I
So,
would imagine so.
you know, you have to figure them out before you can figure out their motivations.
So, when you did your research, did you go into, did you talk to psychologists, police psychologists?
No, I use personal reference for that.
Okay, so,
It's a very personal story.
so, yeah, I've interviewed a few ex-policemen who've written books. It's not an uncommon occurrence, and oftentimes it'll be based on some very moving, usually it's not just because it's interesting, but moving experience they had in a particular case. There is a policeman who's been on this show. His name is John Nolan, and he was in Nassau County. He was head of homicide detectives, and he's written 3 books now, I think, and they're all based on the case. But his books are basically on the case, and I find them interesting because I taught forensic science, so I love that part of it. But I also noticed that, and I think this is a formula for success, to have an interesting case with a character who suffers. People love to have a character who suffers. Why do you think that is?
Well, it's the hero's journey. You have to have the hero has to overcome something. Otherwise, it's just stuff that happened.
Just stuff, yeah. It's true. Yeah. It's true. So, Joseph Conrad, right?
Yeah.
Joseph Campbell and the heroes. He wrote a whole series of books on the hero's journey. He used to do a TV show, and I always call him Conrad because that's another author.
Well, you said Conrad, and I thought of Colonel Kurtz.
You know, it's
Well, Mr. Kurtz in the novel.
Campbell, yeah. So, who did you dedicate your book to? I like to ask that.
I actually thanked a lot of people in the acknowledgments, but I dedicated it. My mother passed away shortly before I published the book, and she would not have approved of the language.
Well, yeah.
But I'm trying to tell a true story. I'm trying to tell a real story.
That is the way.
It's the way people talk in Brooklyn during homicide investigations.
I can imagine.
And the other dedication was to my wife, Janet, because after being retired for 4 years and threatening to write a book, she finally got tired of hearing it, bought me a laptop and said, "Write it already." So I did.
So
Shot to Pieces could not have happened without my wife, Janet.
Well,
her insistence, anyway.
There you go. Nagging has its purpose.
She's more insistent. She doesn't really nag. She's the boss, and she knows it, and she puts her foot down, and things get done.
As a euphemism. So, when you were writing, did you take a class in writing? Join a writers group?
I joined writers groups basically as a way to get my material out and get the knowing opinions of the work as it was progressing. Very, very helpful. I'm a member of the Farmingdale Writers Group that meets in the Farmingdale Library every other Wednesday. It's moderated by a fantastic poet from Nassau County, Judy J.R. Turek. Subsequently, I joined a Long Island Mystery Writers Group, small, 7 people, and very, very helpful. Very skilled writers in that group. And I'm also a member of the Mystery Writers of America.
Oh, you did join
York
that. I was going
chapter,
to
yeah.
ask you that. Yeah, me too. Me
Well,
too.
then I'll see you at one of the events.
I haven't gone to, well, I went to one in the early spring, and I haven't been to one since.
Right.
But they're a great resource.
Yes.
Because they, first of all, they have workshops, and second of all, they also have pretty much venues for you to put your work out.
Yeah.
You can put your work, you can put your book on their website. And yeah.
I've
I know
I've publicized a couple of events that I've done through them, but I haven't looked into actually putting the book on there. Now that I know that I can do that, I'm going to get right on that.
I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I'm pretty
check
sure
it
you
out.
can.
Well, the president of the New York chapter right now, Richie Narvaez, is.
Oh yeah, Richie.
Rich is good.
He's a nice guy. Yeah. He's
very
been on the
effusive
show
with I can believe it.
talking about Mystery Writers of America.
Yeah, yeah, it's a great group.
And then we made an effort to get some events here on Long Island, but we just couldn't get a large enough crowd to make it worthwhile.
Right.
So, but there are so many writers on Long Island. Even within an area of 4 blocks of me, there's 4 of us.
You live near Dina Santarelli.
Yes, Dina.
I was actually on a panel with her at the Levittown Library this past week.
Dina was the first host on this show.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, when I started the show, I was the producer, and I used to like to work in the control room.
Okay.
And Dina was my first host because she knew a lot more authors than I did. Yeah. And then she got very busy with either a book or some project.
She's got the trilogy, the Baby Grand series. And
right.
Her third book is coming out, I think, in the next couple of months.
Right.
But she's doing very well with that.
Yeah, she's a good writer.
Yes.
She's and also a good resource. She teaches at Hofstra.
Yes.
Writing.
Yes.
So there's there's a lot of help for us out there. Did you use an editor?
I did. I actually used Judy Turek, who is also a professional editor, and I used several other people. Took a look at it and made some suggestions that I incorporated. I would like this being my first novel. Every time I read it or read from it, I'd like another crack at it.
Oh no, I know, but that's
everybody. It's never done.
That's everybody. Yeah. I just spoke with her because sometimes I'll help authors out who have not a clue as to how to proceed once they write the book. And this one lady was telling me, she said, I every time I read it, I change it, and then it keeps me from. I said, stop changing it. Get an editor. Yeah. And let the editor make the changes, and then just go forward. Don't read it anymore. And yeah, I know.
even though you don't think it's done, at some point you have to put your hands up and say, print this.
Have I told my story? Okay. So what do you get out of this?
I love to write. I've been writing since I was in 8th grade.
I got that impression from you telling me about writing police reports in narrative form.
Well, that was, I ended up, when I was a rookie detective, for some reason, they want to tell these rookie detectives, short, terse, as less information as you possibly can put in the report, because you don't want to trip yourself up and get crossed up in court.
Yeah, in court,
well,
sure.
That was the approach that got me barbecued on the stand.
And don't tweet.
Oh, well, there was no tweet. Back, we're talking in the 90s.
I'm sorry, that was a political comment.
Yes. No, I got it. Really, I wish they'd take his phone away. But whatever. That approach, that terse, bare bones, minimum information, I spent 3 hours on the stand in cross-examination because I didn't remember anything. And it was a good, straightforward, simple robbery case. I had all the evidence, had the gun, had the bad guy, had a confession. But there was so little information, I left the door open for the defense counsel to just work on things that weren't there. Well, on that day forward, I said, I'm going to write a story that I want to read, so 2 years from now when I go to trial, I'm going to read that story, and I'm going to remember it, and I'm going to testify to that.
Well.
And consequently, through the rest of my career, and hundreds and hundreds of hours of courtroom testimony, I would sit up there with case folders that were sometimes as wide as valises and testify without ever having to refer to a piece of paper in the folder. because I remember the story that I wrote.
Yeah.
So it might have irritated my supervisors, but I don't care.
Yeah, well, writing is a way of remembering.
Yeah, yeah.
Once you write something down, you're more likely to remember it.
And if you write it well, it's compelling, and you definitely remember it.
And let me ask you a question from my own standpoint, because my approach to criminalistics or crime or police work or whatever is from the standpoint of forensic science.
Right.
Do you think that forensic science has really helped in bringing cases really to justice?
Oh, absolutely. And I have
more so today than...
Absolutely, and I have a personal experience with that. When I was in the 8-3 squad, I blew the dust off a 40-year-old homicide case. It was a rape murder, and there were tons and tons of forensic evidence that really wasn't being collected. It was being collected, but nobody was testing it back then. 2 kinds of blood at the scene. Get the DNA. There was already a suspect on the case, but the detectives, they'd interview him every year, and he wouldn't crack on it. He wasn't giving anything up. There was no DNA profile to compare it to, so my partner and I actually had to go down to North Carolina to go visit him in his trailer park. I brought a box of Cools and my own ashtray. So I had a DNA profile when I went back to New York.
There you go.
And we ended up making an arrest on a 40-year-old homicide.
Yeah, for those people who are watching this show and don't understand, cigarettes,
Saliva.
You leave your saliva, you leave your skin cells. Same thing with you drink from a glass.
Yes.
You lick an envelope.
Yep. Spit on the street. Jeannie Valentin, fantastic detective from Brooklyn North Homicide, solved serial murder case down in Brooklyn North, because as they were bringing the guy in for questioning, they didn't have anything on him, just a tip. But he spit on the sidewalk on the way in, and she protected that, collected it, and that's what they nailed him on.
Yep.
Brilliant stuff.
And also cold cases.
Yes.
Fantastic for cold cases, yeah. But that's how I approach all of this, and I think that's probably it's interesting, but it's much drier than your story, because your story has that human element to it.
Yes, I did introduce some forensics with respect to the crime scene, but it all had to do, which was very big for me, most of my murders were gunshot murders. You can tell a lot about how things transpired based upon the wounds.
Yeah.
And,
the blood splatters.
The blood spatter.
Stuff.
And for the most part, I have Detective Durr responding to the crime scene, making his observations based upon all of that. And the day later, it's confirmed by the medical examiner in the autopsy.
Yeah.
So it's typical work, at least from my experience, murders in
But it's
Brooklyn North.
important work.
Yeah, and it's the type of thing that some detectives don't feel like they need to know this stuff. Like, how do you know what happened if you don't pay attention?
You have to pay attention to the crime scene. Yeah. And I mean, perfect example of that is the OJ case, where everything was so muddied. I mean, they had a mountain of evidence against this guy.
You know, part of the problem was how they presented it. It was, within 30 seconds, everybody was asleep. You don't have to explain the science to that minutia.
No.
You have an expert to do that.
Right, but not only that, but they impugn the integrity of the technicians at the crime scene, of the detectives who handled it, and I always, when I look at these cases or I watch them on television, I always look to see what the defense lawyer goes after. And if he goes after the admissibility of the evidence, the integrity of the crime scene people and the detectives, he did it, or she did it.
Oh, yeah.
Because, and that's very prejudiced, but what can I say? But let's get back to your book. How did you publish?
I self-published. I went through Lulu Publishing, which I don't know that I would necessarily do that again. I presently have the prequel to Shot to Pieces out to an editor right now, and my intention is, and I also have 2 other finished novels, and I am 8 chapters in.